I'm Michael Montero with Boxing Monthly, and this is the Neutral Corner for the week of October 3rd. Sorry I've been off the radar for a while. It's been a crazy month in September for me. I went on vacation, flew thousands of miles to the East Coast to spend some time with my family, and I moved to a new home. I'm here now and I'm renovating and still getting moved and settled, so it's just been kind of bananas. The boxing schedule's been busy in September, but it's been kind of a lot of mismatches and lackluster fights. There hasn't been that much to talk about on a weekly basis, but we're going to cover the entire month of September in this episode, and after this, we're going to get back to weekly TNC videos, so look for us every Wednesday going forward. But right now, let's get into the ring walk. So I got a question on Twitter from 3-Piece Boxing, and he asked, Mike, what's your thoughts on the bronze bomber? Anything there, or another ex-football player posing as a boxer? Well, first, my man, I think you got Deontay Wilder mixed up with Dominic Breazeale. They just both fought together on a PBC card. Breazeale is an ex-football player. Wilder is actually an ex-basketball player, to my understanding. And he left basketball to start boxing. He had a daughter, and his daughter had some health issues, and he had to make some money. There's a lot to like about Deontay Wilder, right? He's very charismatic, which is great for a heavyweight. The American mainstream sports media has certain things they envision when they think of the words heavyweight champion. And Deontay Wilder, for the 21st century, is really out of central casting. He's everything that the mainstream media in this country just eats up when it comes to a heavyweight. As far as what he does in the ring, he's really only had one top-level heavyweight he's faced, and that was Bermane earlier this year. And look, he passed that test with flying colors. That wasn't the best version of Bermane. That fight had been delayed several times. Stiverne had to do several different camps. I heard that after his title-winning effort against Chris Arreola in their rematch, Stiverne blew up to almost 300 pounds. So he's a guy who really just didn't take care of himself very well. All that being said, Wilder did everything he was supposed to do in that fight. He worked behind the jab, he used his height, he went for the kill, he tried to get the knockout, but when it wasn't there, he remained disciplined, he got the W. Problem is, he's had 2 fights since then against, I don't want to say scrubs, but against journeyman level opponents at best. And he hasn't looked great. He's been entertaining. No doubt he hasn't fought as disciplined against it was Molina and Duhaupas, or I think I'm saying that name correctly, Johann Duhaupas. That was the fight that just happened, which I'll talk about later. Both of those opponents, nobody really knew who they were, right? Especially the Frenchman that he just fought. And again, it's obvious Wilder didn't fight as disciplined as he should have fought, as he did against Stiverne. So it almost looks like he took a step back. I think he was just fighting down to the level of his opposition. Those fights really didn't do anything. Maybe the fight with Duhaupas, forced Wilder to kind of bite down a little bit because he has a swollen eye. He's shown some toughness, but when he fights disciplined, he does use his range well. He fights good from the outside. He hasn't really been tagged with many punches from a real true heavyweight. Stiverne nailed him a few times, but Wilder saw the shots coming. What's going to be interesting is to see what happens when he doesn't see the shot coming and how he responds. But so far, he's pretty much passed every test with flying colors. And I still rate Alexander Povetkin and Tyson Fury, maybe even Bryant Jennings, slightly above Deontay Wilder. But if he gets Povetkin in the ring, Povetkin is mandatory. The WBC is mandated. That has to be the next fight for Wilder. I don't expect that to happen this year. I think it'll happen early next year. If it does happen, if Wilder actually takes that fight and fights the same way he fought against Stiverne, a very disciplined fight, I think he could beat Povetkin. No doubt Povetkin's much, much better than Stiverne, but Povetkin's a short, squat kind of heavyweight. Is he going to be able to get inside of Wilder if Wilder fights smart? Another thing Wilder's shown is that he's got a lot of athleticism. So, look, I can talk about Wilder all day, but overall at this point, he is the best of all the American heavyweight contenders in this school of ex-football players, ex-basketball players who have moved over to boxing, who are coming up in the heavyweight division now. He's the best and most proven of those guys. And I give him a really good shot against Povetkin if that fight happens. My concern with Wilder is if the Povetkin fight doesn't happen, he dumps that WBC title and just becomes the PBC heavyweight champion and stays under Al Heyman's protective umbrella. He's pretty much gonna waste a career, and at some point he's gonna get tagged, knocked out, and we're gonna miss out on what could be the heavyweight fight of this generation, and that would be Deontay Wilder and Vladimir Klitschko going head to head. I think historically, that would be the biggest fight in the heavyweight division since Lewis Tyson. I think it might even be bigger than that because Mike Tyson was pretty much shot by the time he fought Lennox Lewis. I think it could be the biggest fight in the heavyweight division since Tyson Holyfield. So hopefully those things happen. There's just still a lot of questions, but really long ramble here. I like what I see in Deontay Wilder so far overall. Thanks for your question, man. All right, so a whole lot of fights to cover in the month of September. I got all my notes here. We're gonna go through these piece by piece. Some of them I'm just gonna kind of glance over because they just don't matter, right? Let's start Friday, September 11th. There was a PBC card. Adonis Stevenson scored a third round technical knockout over nobody we care about. No disrespect to the opponent, but they were unranked. The fight just doesn't matter. Look, with Adonis Stevenson, I'm not really gonna cover any of his fights and talk about him in detail until he fights somebody that we give a damn about. I understand that his promoter, Al Heyman, they don't want to fight on HBO to fight Kovalev. Kovalev's people at Main Events have re-signed with HBO. They basically left their mandatory position at the WBC on the table because they didn't want to fight off HBO. I understand that. It looks like the only way a Stevenson-Kovalev fight's going to happen is if there's a split network pay-per-view kind of thing or something, and there's just not enough money in that fight yet. So I don't expect it to happen. So for Stevenson, you know, why not fight Andres Fonfara again in a rematch if Fonfara gets past Nathan Cleverly, who we scheduled to fight soon? You know, why not fight, I think there's another PBC light heavyweight, Gonzalez, guy from South America. Why not fight him? Fight one of these guys that's actually ranked that we give a damn about. Until he does, I don't care. I'm not gonna talk about it. On that card, in the co-feature, Errol Spence, who's probably the best prospect in boxing right now, or one of the top prospects, he had a good step-up fight. Scored a 8th round TKO win over Chris Van Heerden, whom he knocked down twice in the 7th round, and Van Heerden had never been down as a pro. He's a guy who can handle himself in the ring, seasoned veteran fighter, and Errol Spence absolutely dominated. He looked really, really good. And I gotta give PBC matchmakers credit on this one. I thought that was a good step-up fight for Spence. He passed the test with flying colors. That same night, on a different card, another prospect, Oscar Valdez, scored a 5th round technical knockout over Chris Avalos, whom he knocked down in the 3rd. And Avalos is another good quality veteran fighter, and Oscar Valdez looked really, really great. I saw Valdez ringside earlier this year. He fought in the undercard of the Bradley Vargas fight. I think it was the co-feature on HBO that night. And one of my complaints about Valdez was that he was very one-dimensional with his offense. It was a lot of the same thing. It was, you know, just 1-2, repeat, 1-2, repeat. He showed more offensive versatility against Avalos. So he's making progressions. I like what I see from him. And same thing with Errol Spence. Those you know, prospects are fighting guys that are pushing them a little bit and making them learn on the job, and they're doing that. On the very next night, on September 12th, there was a lot of boxing action on both sides of the pond. Let's start with the heavyweights over in the UK. Anthony Joshua scores a first-round TKO over Gary Cornish, who Cornish physically matched up well with Joshua. They look like the same height and weight pretty much. They look about the same in physical strength and everything, but the guy offered absolutely nothing. That fight did absolutely nothing for Anthony Joshua. It was, the first big shot he landed, it was done. The real impressive performance for me was on the undercard. Dillian Whyte, another UK heavyweight, scored a third-round TKO over Brian Minto. Brian Minto is not a world-class heavyweight, but he's certainly a better opponent than Gary Cornish. And Dillian Whyte dominated. Minto is a guy who has experience. He's been in there with everyone. He's shown durability. He's hung tough with some pretty good heavyweights in his career. So I thought Whyte looked really, really good. And right when I saw those two, I was like, why aren't they fighting each other? Why isn't that happening? And bam! It's like somebody heard me. Somebody heard you guys, because I know you all were saying the same thing. Anthony Joshua, Dillian Whyte are scheduled to fight December 12th in the O2 Arena. I love this. This is what's supposed to happen, people. These are two undefeated heavyweight prospects in the same country. They just fought, literally September 12th. 3 months later to the day, they're gonna fight each other. And here's the thing. One of them is gonna win, obviously, and that winner will be, they'll be bumped up a notch. I'm not gonna say to contender status, but to like junior contender status, where they're 1 or 2 fights away from possibly getting into that contender role and challenging for a title. The loser of that fight doesn't go backwards that much. You know why? Because they're prospects. Prospects lose sometimes. When you're a champion and you lose, the stakes are much higher. When you're a prospect and you lose, you're a prospect. It's a learning lesson. It's not the end of the world. You go back to the drawing board, you learn from it. So the loser of this fight still could go on to build themselves up to a contender. Yes, it'll be harder, but it's not the end of the world. I love this. And it reminds me a lot of when Tyson Fury and Derek Chisora fought in 2011. They were both undefeated at that time, right? They didn't have to fight each other. 2 UK guys, they did. Fury won the fight. He's gone on to win other good fights. He worked himself into a title shot against the champion, Vladimir Klitschko. That's been postponed. More on that later. Chisora went on to challenge Vitaly Klitschko and push him. So it wasn't the end of the world for Chisora. And years later, he got a fight against David Haye, which was a good payday for him. So I gotta say this. The UK does so much better of a job, the promoters there, with their heavyweights, of building them up and matching them tough and challenging them than we do here in the United States. I'll talk about it later with Al Heyman and some of his American heavyweights. He's putting them up against a bunch of scrubs and they never fight each other. And that's a problem. I love that Anthony Joshua and Dillian Whyte are fighting in a few months. Just love it. But that same day, September 12th, there was also a PBC card. Peter Quillen scored a 5th round, almost decapitation over a completely unranked opponent. I'm not even going to talk about that fight. Again, it was useless. It served no purpose. Until Peter Quillen fights someone we care about, I'm not going to report it. It's obvious him and Daniel Jacobs are supposed to fight, I believe later this year or early next year. And I can't remember if that one's been announced officially or not, so forgive me if it has. But they're going to fight in Brooklyn. I think Peter Quillen's going to beat Danny Jacobs because he's just a better fighter. And he'll have a title again at that point. My concern is, what does he do from there? Because Peter Quillen's a guy who's experienced, he's got the craft, he's got the skills, he's ready to challenge Gennady Golovkin, the Cotto Canelo winner. I hope he doesn't just fight in that PBC umbrella against a bunch of stiffs. I hope he fights someone that we care about after he beats Jacobs. Also on that card, Jermell Charlo scored a 3rd round TKO over Cornelius Canine Bundridge, my hometown of Detroit. for a vacant 154-pound title. Look, for Bundridge, he's a guy who was an overachiever. He got the most out of his limited skill set with just mental toughness and work ethic. This guy you always wanted to root for, but he looked pretty bad in this fight. And it's probably time for him to maybe have one farewell bout at home, maybe at the Joe Louis Arena or something in Detroit, and hang him up. For Charlo, he gets a title here. I think it's clear that Al Haymon is going to try to get both Charlo brothers a title. They're never going to fight each other. And, I don't really rate this. It's a vacant title. It looks good for Charlo. He's passed this test. It's a step up for him. But I still want to see him in there with one of the elite level 154-pounders. The real impressive performance on this PBC card for me was Marcus Browne, who is one of the American Olympians in the last class. He's one of the better prospects right now from that Olympic class. 15-0. He scored a first-round knockout over Gabriel Campillo. Campillo is shot to shit. I believe he's lost, I don't know, 5 out of his last 10 or something. He's been knocked out several times in a row. But just to give you a little perspective, Artur Beterbiev, Campillo went 4 rounds with him. For Browne to get him out of there in a round like that, pretty impressive performance from a prospect against a seasoned pro like that. So Browne's looking really good. Of course, later that same night, the Mayweather-Berto pay-per-view card. The main event, there's not a whole lot to talk about. I'm going to be totally honest here. Call me unprofessional. I didn't watch the fight. I still haven't seen it. I didn't need to. I called a 12-0 shutout for Mayweather before the fight happened. That was my prediction, and it was true. And I knew I didn't even have to watch it. Some people were saying, oh, he picked Berto so he could get a knockout in his last fight. And I was telling them, you know what? Mayweather doesn't go for the knockout. He's not going to knock out Andre Berto, a guy that Jesus Soto Karass knocked out, a guy that other fighters have badly hurt. Robert Guerrero, Victor Ortiz, really hurt Berto. And Mayweather didn't even do that. Floyd did what he does. He played it safe, and he won a very technical, classy boxing style fight. It wasn't his last fight. Floyd said it was. I don't believe it. There's too much money on the table. He wants that 50-0. I don't think he'll be back early next year. I think it's going to be late next year or possibly early 2017 against another hand-picked opponent. And he'll retire 50-0. But right now, we could take Floyd off the rankings because he says he's retired. I just don't believe it. On the undercard, this was a pretty solid undercard. Badou Jack scored a split decision win over George Groves, who he knocked down in the first round. He got a 168-pound title here. Or no, I'm sorry, he defended the title he won against Anthony Durrell earlier this year, which I believe that was a split decision as well. Look, for George Groves, I thought he was going to win this fight. This was his chance, really his last chance in my opinion, to grab a title. It just doesn't look like it's going to happen for him. He's this close to becoming a gatekeeper at 168 pounds. And that's a shame because I really felt he had potential to win a title at some point in his career. He just might not be the same after that Carl Froch knockout. Maybe he can go back and work on some things, but for Badou Jack, he's got a close win over Durrell now. He's got a close win over George Groves. The only guy at super middleweight that I really care about right now is Andre Ward. Because of the promotional situation, a fight with Jack and Ward can't happen, won't happen. So who does Badou Jack fight? Does he move up 7 pounds and fight Adonis Stevenson for the light heavyweight championship? Maybe something like that's possible. But I think this is another guy who's going to kind of fall into that PBC, void. He's just going to be fighting hand-picked guys for a while. But maybe they can build up a fan base with this guy. It'd be smart for him to have a homecoming fight now that he's got a title. Why not have him go back overseas to Europe and have a homecoming fight, make some money. But I'd love to see some sort of unification at super middleweight right now because It was once one of the strongest divisions of boxing. I think it's pretty weak right now. The fight of the night was between Roman Martinez and Orlando Salido. This was a rematch. Another fight of the year contender. Their fight earlier this year, I thought was a little better for me, for my taste. This fight ended in a draw, which was an outright travesty because Orlando Salido threw more, landed more, controlled the pace more, just thoroughly, I thought, outworked Martinez and deserved the decision. So if they do have a rubber match, I think it's absolutely justifiable because I thought Salido just performed better on this night. The reason why I like the first fight better, even though this second fight was probably more competitive two-way action, is the crowd difference. You know, the crowd atmosphere at the MGM Grand for Mayweather-Berto, it was weak. And I just felt like it was kind of a shame that these two guys putting on another fight of the year candidate were only in front of a few thousand fans, it seemed. It seemed like a lot of the people there for that fight were there just to watch the main event. Just looking in the stadium, in the arena, you know, there's a lot of empty seats. It looked half full, maybe, during that fight. And that kind of just killed the mood for me. During their first fight, it was just a much more passionate crowd. It was more filled in of real boxing fans. And if they do a rubber match, that's the kind of fight that I just feel would be great at StubHub Center. Yes, I'm biased because I live in Los Angeles, but I just think that rubber match at StubHub Center, you're gonna have, the crowd might only be 5,000 or something for that fight, but it'd be real boxing fans and it'd be loud and passionate, and it adds to a fight of the year candidate when you have that passion bleeding through the TV screen and it mirrors what you're seeing in the ring. That's just my personal preference. Last Saturday, September 26th, it was another PBC card. This one was on NBC. It was Deontay Wilder's premiere on American network television. In the main event, he scored an 11th round TKO win over Frenchman Johann Duhaupas. And I gotta give the Frenchman credit. Look, at first, when we all saw the name announced, you know, for Wilder's opponent, we were all like, who the hell is this guy, you know? He wasn't even known really much in Europe, where he's from. And he comes from France, which is not exactly a boxing hotbed. But he hung tough. He came in there to push Wilder. He wanted to go all 12. That was very clear. You know, there were several times when Wilder just was just teeing off, unloading. And I would see him, Duhaupas, cover up and look over at referee Jack Reese and say, I'm fine, I'm fine. He kept telling him, I'm okay. Basically saying, don't stop this damn fight. But by the 11th round, he was just beat up. He was bloody, looked like his nose was broken. He had cuts. And he had absolutely no chance to win the fight. And Wilder just came out there and unloaded an unanswered, it must have been a 10-20 punch combination. And Jack Reese had no choice to stop it. I thought it was a good stoppage. I like that Jack Reese let him fight. And I like that the Frenchman made Wilder work. He landed a lot of counter shots. Wilder's eye, I believe it was his left eye, was swollen up. And as I mentioned before during the ring walk segment, it made Wilder show us a little something, show us a little toughness, a little grit. And I got to give Wilder credit. He kept going for the knockout. He didn't simply say, you know what, this guy's not going to go away. Let me just stick and move and get the decision here. He kept trying to get the stoppage. He wanted to entertain the fans, and that matters. So even though this wasn't a very good opponent, and it probably didn't do anything for Wilder in terms of development, in fact, it might have taken him a step back because he was able to get away with being lazy and not fighting very responsibly. But it did force him to learn on the job a little bit, dealing with an injury to that eye, dealing with a guy who was being very stubborn and didn't want to go away. So, you know, some good and some bad, but overall a pretty entertaining fight. In the co-feature, Dominic Breazeale was another undefeated American heavyweight, scored a unanimous decision over Fred Cassie, a guy who got robbed against Chris Arreola earlier this year. He got robbed again here. The cards were really, really bad. Look, I scored the fight for Breazeale 6 rounds to 4. This was a 10-round fight. So I had it 96-94 for Breazeale, but the cards were 97-93, which is pushing it, 98-92, and 100-90. The 98-92 score is just bad. But the 100-90 score is disgusting. And the judge that turned in that score should not only be suspended for at least 6 months, maybe a year, but when they come back, they should not be allowed to work any televised fight, any title fight, even if it's a regional title, until they can prove that they can accurately score a fight. These judges that turn in horrible scorecards like this need to be suspended, and they need to work their way back up the ladder when they come back. That means when they come back to 4-rounders, and you move them up along the way. Just like you do with a prospect in the ring, you should do it the same way with the judge outside the ring. Speaking on Dominic Breazeale, this is a guy who played quarterback in college. Big guy, big man. Wilder's a big guy, but he's got more of a slender, athletic kind of build, kind of like me. Breazeale looks like a football player, okay? Really big midsection, shoulders, just a massive man. For all that mass, doesn't hit very hard. Doesn't hit very hard for that size. And look, he was fighting a guy in Cassie who's very short. They list him, I think, at 6 feet. He looked like he was 5'9" in there. Short, stout, compact guy. And I can speak as a tall guy. If I'm sparring with a short guy, it gets awkward, especially on the inside. There's really no way to hit a guy on his chin on the inside when you're a much taller fighter. If that smaller fighter knows what they're doing, if they know how to position themselves and how to get their head up in your chest. For a taller guy fighting a shorter guy, you have to be on the outside. You have to be far on the outside and be behind your stick. That jab is what sets up the shots to land on the chin. And if you got a guy on the outside that's blinded by a jab, you can land right hands. When he starts looking for the right hand, you can feint, you can come with hooks. And I've seen Deontay Wilder do that. He makes those adjustments as a tall guy with long arms. Breazeale doesn't, okay? He's all on the back foot, he leans back. He played quarterback in college, and quarterbacks come back and lean on their back foot. You're not supposed to throw off your back foot, but you come back and lean when you're scanning the field. He still has that kind of habit, and he just doesn't put his butt into the shots. He doesn't turn over, and man, he gets hit a lot. Gets hit a lot. Cassie landed a ton of shots. Breazeale has shown a good chin so far, but how will that chin hold up against another big super heavyweight who knows how to punch? No one can take shots like that forever. I mean, he just ate shots all night against Cassie. He had a fight earlier this year on PBC. It was the same thing. So for Breazeale, he's just limited, and he's going to go as far as his chin will take him. That's the kind of fighter he is. He'll go as far as his chin will take him. On the untelevised portion of this card, well, actually it was televised on NBC Sports Network, I think. After the NBC broadcast, they switched to that sister network. Another American heavyweight undefeated, Charles Martin, took on Vicente Sanchez, an unknown Mexican heavyweight. Looks like a blown up light heavyweight with a beer gut. Scored a 3rd round TKO. This is another, opponent that just isn't going to do much. I don't think Charles Martin got any improvement in this fight. Look, Charles Martin is, I think at this point, a junior contender in the heavyweight division. He's ready to maybe go up against a top 10 guy. Breazeale's not really there, but why can't Breazeale and Charles Martin fight each other? Breazeale's 16-0, 14 knockouts. Charles Martin's 22-0-1 with 20 knockouts. Why can't they fight each other? I talked earlier about Anthony Joshua and Dillian Whyte and how the UK promoters build heavyweight prospects better. And of course, the German promoters over there in Europe, that's where the heavyweight division's hot, right? The American promoters should look at that. Al Heyman, talking to you here, see what they do over there and match some of your undefeated American heavyweight prospects against each other. These guys that played football, played basketball, they switched over to boxing, match them against each other. What's the worst that can happen? One of them loses and has to go back to the drawing board. It's not the end of your career if you lose. I just would love to see these guys start fighting each other on these PBC cards and make it so much more fun. Look, Brazil and Martin could fight each other, and the winner of that fight could fight Deontay Wilder. These are guys that have all been on cards together on PBC air. People that do follow the PBC know their faces. They like to see them fight each other. Why not? Another American heavyweight on the 26th scored a win. This was on another card. Andy Ruiz, undefeated guy, went up against Joel Godfrey, scored a unanimous decision victory. Look, for Andy Ruiz, this was his first fight of 2015, 20 pounds less than his last fight last year, where he scored a win over Sergey Lakovich, a shot Sergey Lakovich. I believe it was 267 pounds for that fight. This past Saturday, it was 247 pounds. Now, Andy Ruiz is probably 6'1". They list him at 6'2", more like 6'1". I'd like to see him down in the 230s. Never going to be a big heavyweight, so it's going to be difficult for him when he goes up against the Deontay Wilders of the world, Tyson Fury, Vladimir Klitschko, if he ever gets that fight. But he has hand speed. He has some of the quicker hands. And not necessarily the speed, but the fluidity, the combinations. He throws combinations very, very well for a heavyweight. And he just kind of seems to have a natural fighter instinct about him. So he's a fun heavyweight to watch. I'd like to see him drop 10 more pounds and get in there against one of these other prospects, man, against one of these other top heavyweights. I don't know if it was a year or two ago, he fought Joe Hanks. Might have been a couple years ago, who was another undefeated American prospect at that time. And that was one of those fights that was just, a good thing for his development. He beat Hanks, he dominated him. And it just showed that Ruiz is, on another level. Needs another one of those kind of fights now. It's time, right? So he's got this win out of the way, kind of worked on some ring rust. Get him in there against a ranked guy now. It's time. Top 15, top 20 at least. Same day on the 26th, Juan Francisco Estrada scored a 10th round TKO over Hernan Marquez to defend his 2 flyweight titles. Now, he won 2 flyweight titles against Brian Viloria in 2013, and he lost to Roman Gonzalez the year earlier, 2012, in a good fight. And Roman Gonzalez has talked about having a rematch with Juan Francisco Estrada, who has 2 titles, as I mentioned. Roman Gonzalez has 1 title. He's about to fight Brian Viloria in a few weeks. If Roman Gonzalez beats Brian Viloria, Juan Francisco Estrada looked really good Saturday. If those 2 guys can fight early next year to unify 3 titles at flyweight, especially if it's a co-feature on another Gennady Golovkin fight, man, that's good stuff. So, that could be a possible, another great double header or something later next year for K2 Promotions and HBO to think about. If Roman Gonzalez wins his next fight, get him in there with Juan Francisco Estrada again for a rematch on the undercard of a Gennady Golovkin fight. What a way to start off 2016 that would be. Whew, that was a hell of a review. Now let's get into the preview. This weekend, there are 2 battling cards. Oh boy, I love this when the networks battle. Let's start with the Showtime card. Now, I've said this before in other videos. Showtime Boxing has had an absolutely abysmal 2015. This is a decent card. The matchups on paper look to be pretty good. I just don't like the fact that they're for titles. Well, the headliner anyway. Adrian Broner is going up against Khabib Allakhverdiev. I think I said that right. for a vacant title. Even though Adrian Broner is coming off a really, really bad loss to Shawn Porter, and Allakhverdiev lost to Jesse Vargas last year in his last fight. I gotta say, a lot of people felt that Allakhverdiev should have got the decision over Jesse Vargas, and he was robbed. I'll be honest, I haven't seen that fight yet. But either way, they're both coming off those losses, and now they're fighting for a title. So I believe it's for a WBA title. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it's for a WBA title. I've said it many times before. I'll say it again. The WBA is an absolute joke. They are the worst of the 4 major sanctioning bodies. They are an absolute, disgusting, pathetic joke. This fight should not be for a title. But it's in Cincinnati. That's where Adrian Broner's from. It should be a passionate crowd. I guess we'll see. Is he going to lose some of the steam after his losses now? That he's lost to Maidana, that he's lost to Shawn Porter? Are the fans in Cincinnati going to come out and support? It'll be interesting to see. My prediction is it won't be as big of a crowd as he's fought of before in Cincinnati, but the fans that do show up will be passionate and support him. In the co-feature, Jose Pedraza is defending the 130-pound title that he won back in June against Edner Cherry. Edner Cherry is one of these guys that, man, it just seems like he's been around forever. I think he went pro around 2000, 2001, and he's just one of these perennial contenders who always makes for a tough fight, no matter who he fights. So I think it's a real good matchup for Pedraza. I don't know that it's a worthy for a title fight, but it'll be good for Pedraza's development. The one thing I'm concerned about Jose Pedraza is he's a Puerto Rican, and why isn't he fighting in Puerto Rico? I don't know. Hopefully, if he gets this W, he can get a fight in Puerto Rico. He's their only titleist right now. Miguel Cotto technically is the linear middleweight champion of the world, but I think he's going to lose that title to Canelo Alvarez. So, Puerto Rican boxing media, you guys are big on Felix Verdejo, and I understand that. I am too. I think he's one of the top prospects out there. But this Jose Pedraza guy, he's got a title. He's repping your island. You got to start getting behind this guy. That same night on HBO, a much, much better card. HBO has had a much, much better year than Showtime, and this weekend will be no exception. In the main event, Lucas Matthysse is taking on Matthysse-Postol. I talked about this matchup on a recent episode of 10 Count on UCN Live with Steve Kim and Doug Fisher. We kind of broke down this matchup. I like this fight. I like this fight a lot. I don't think it's going to be as exciting of a fight as Matthysse had in recent years, like, against John Molina earlier this year against Ruslan Provodnikov, because Postol doesn't fight that way. But I think it's going to be a difficult, competitive fight, and probably more competitive than those two fights were over the course of the entire fight. More two-way competitive action. That's what I'm expecting, because Matthysse is a short guy. Matthysse-Postol is very tall, very long arms, and he uses his height very, very well. Very good technician, a lot of boxing ability. And Matthysse has shown in the past he can box against bangers, against brawlers. He can look good in box against them, but really technically sound boxers can give him trouble. John Molina is a tall, rangy guy that gave him trouble for a few rounds in their great fight last year. But although Molina can crack, he has a really good punch, and Postol doesn't have that. Postol has a lot better boxing ability and defensive ability. All that being said, I still slightly favor Matthysse because he's just so much more experienced. He's the much harder hitter, and he's just been there before. But do not be surprised if Postol pulls out an upset here. I don't know if he can get the decision. That's another story. But I'll be ringside. I'll be covering this one ringside Saturday night. It's here at StubHub. It's just an outstanding atmosphere. Matthysse has kind of made it a home away from home for him. He's had some fights there now. And I expect a good crowd atmosphere. But I think that if it goes to the cards, I just think Matthysse is probably going to get a decision here, a close, possibly controversial decision win. In the co-feature, Antonio Orozco is taking on Humberto Soto. Orozco is 22-0, 15 knockouts. Has fought his entire brief career. I think he's been a pro 6-7 years, between 140, 147 pounds, right around there. Humberto Soto went pro in 1997, the year I graduated high school, as a bantamweight. And he's fought the bulk of his career, 126 to 130 pounds. In recent years, it's been 135, 140. There's no doubt. He's the much more worn down guy here. Smaller guy, not as strong, but the level of experience, man. Humberto Soto is one of those guys that he's been around forever. He's been in there with so many good fighters, consummate professional boxer. I think he's got over 70 pro fights now. And he never disappoints. He always gives an honest, good, solid, professional effort. I think this is just great matchmaking. And for Orozco, who I do favor in this fight, I do think he should get a decision win here. It's possible he could score a late knockout. I just don't know, man. Soto's so crafty and tough. I think it'll go to the cards, but Soto is absolutely going to push him and force him to learn on the job and to make adjustments. What will be interesting to see is if Orozco can respond to the different things, the adjustments Soto's going to make in the ring, because he's seen everything. If Orozco can do that, he will show he's for real. He gets this win over Soto, he's a legitimate player in his weight class. He's going to struggle. I expect Soto to win some early rounds, maybe even some middle rounds, late rounds. But I do expect youth will be served here. Either way, it's going to be, I think, the fight of the night. When you look at all the cards, Showtime and HBO, I think this is going to be the fight of the night. But there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, a long-winded episode of Neutral Corner. I had a lot of ground to cover there. As I promised, though, going forward, it's going to be every week Wednesday, so look out for it. I'll catch you next time.